Hope everyone's doing well. My name is Dean Sam. I'm based out of Hong Kong. I'm the vice president of Third Stage Consulting Group out of the Asia Pacific region. It's kind of surreal being here and being part of Stratosphere because about 5, 6 years ago, I was watching as a fanboy watching Eric Kimberling on his YouTube videos talking about digital transformation and ERP implementation. And everything he was saying, it just made total sense, right? It's not about the technology. It's about getting yourselves ready, prepared, understanding what you're going to be embarking on and getting ready for it. So just want to talk quickly about my experience in the ERP and digital transformation space. I started my first half of my career working at the client end as a super user, business analyst, project manager, program director, and also towards a CTO position. I worked in different multinational organizations. One of them was Gildan Activewear. They're the biggest t-shirt manufacturer in the world with 15 facilities across Central America, South America, and Asia. And some of the insights that I got from that organization we'll be sharing in today's presentation. And once I've done all of that work from the client side, I moved to the consulting world because I've gone through the trenches. I've done that end-to-end implementation from strategy to delivery. Now I'm very grateful for being part of this of Third Stage Consulting. It's been a journey, and it's really coming full circle right here, right now for me personally. So during yesterday's lunch, speaker was Eric. The speaker was Eric, and he was talking about digital transformation and the importance of executive alignment. And executive alignment is so much more critical when we're talking about multinationals at that level. And I'm just going to go and share some slides of some executive alignment outputs that we've had with certain multinational organizations. So we do an executive alignment work stream with them. And this is an example of one of the slides of one of the outcomes that comes out of it. And we go through a number of different key business topics. This one is about sales and demand planning. And we see where they stand in that spectrum between decentralized and centralized model for that multinational organization. And as we can see here in the current state, which is the red dot, it's more leaning towards that decentralized state. And where they want to go with their digital transformation is really moving into that centralized point. So therefore, all of the sales, the demand planning has to be consolidated in a one uniform planning team. So all the data of the organization in terms of sales and marketing and demand has to move into that centralized planning role, and then everything under that will be moved downstream to the facilities for execution. Another example is finance and accounts, back office, AP, and AR. That organization was, each office, each regional area had their own back office function, and they wanted to move into more of a shared service model, and everything would be centralized and taken care of at one central point. Another part is procurement management. And so in this case, as you can see in the current state, is each regional office was taking care of their own procurement, and nothing was consolidated. There was no oversight from the central team. And in the future state, they want more oversight. So the sourcing process would have to be done in that centralized state. There would be a chief procurement officer coming in that would oversee and set out the process, set out the terms and conditions for procurement, set out the pricing for all the vendors, and as well as vendor master data management also would be moved into more of a centralized state. And talk about master data management regarding your item code, your bill of materials, your routings, all of that. This multinational wanted that to be done all again in that centralized model. So I'm just sharing with you some of these key examples for those multinationals. And this is just one example of multinationals, but the tendency is to move to that centralized state in that digital transformation. And what I've seen from my experience working at the client end is for multinational, is for that global digital transformation, moving to more of a centralized architecture, more centralized setup is the right way to go, because that's where you get economies of scale. You can better manage your priorities through the digital transformation journey. So with that centralized point of view, the next part is building out that centralized global operating model. Okay. So taking an example from a manufacturing organization, if we break it down into the key functions of the organizations, F&A, marketing and sales, supply chain, manufacturing, human resources, and we go one level lower, let's take the example of supply chain. Well, we have to break it down into certain key departments under the supply chain. And that would be planning, procurement, warehousing, and logistics. Now we have to see how these departments are going to operate in the future. So building out that future operating model. So therefore, now it's really seeing what this technology is going to, what we want out of this technology. And what Susan, who is right there, was saying, what does success look like in this digital transformation space? So the first level of success is building out the corporate policy for each of these departments. So how does the organization want to operate for planning? And the responsible person who owns that corporate policy and needs to draft it is the senior executive of that department. So let's take an example of a manufacturing organization. So we want to set out the different planning levels that are required in the organization. It could be sales and operations planning, MPS, master production scheduling. And then we want to find out and we want to decide which products that we produce, where would they pre-produce, in which facility. So it's setting up that framework for how the organization is going to operate in each of those sub-departments. Next step is bringing in the MIS department and the system architect to take that corporate policy and unpack that in terms of an informational process model and digital roadmap. So it's defining what are those process requirements, defining what's that functional architecture that we need, what's going to be in that ERP. So what modules are we going to be using from the ERP, and do we need other bolt-on solutions, or do we need to build other sub-applications to meet the needs of that corporate policy? And also as important is to build that digital roadmap and to identify, are we going to go with a phase-wise approach? How are we going to deploy all of those locations? What is the priority? Which location should we deploy first? Now, unpacking that even further is we bring in the business analysts. So we have that informational process model, which is more of the high-level process design, but now we really go into that system process and even the data design and building out that functional blueprint for which how the ERP would be configured moving forward. And that's extremely important. And the role of the business analyst, in my view, being a past business analyst is extremely key, because they're the ones actually executing the digital transformation. They're the ones working with the users, working and taking what's required from senior management, from the architects, and really making it happen. And finally, but as important, is the regional super users. So when we're talking about multinationals, we need to have these super users in each of these regions where they provide their input of what is the regional requirements, what are the tendencies of that regional area, and that information would be moved back up to the business analysts, and then they would finally develop the final blueprint for that locality specifically. So for all of these departments, the same process has to unfold, right? And that's what success looks like. and going back to Susan, is to have that results-driven leadership. And all of these ownership levels is a leadership level, and they are really responsible in defining what success is. Now, going back to we were talking about change management, and I do would like to encourage, if you guys haven't attended the change management seminars from yesterday morning, we had Emma, Friska, and Doug, who gave great presentations on change management. But talking about change management on this level, from this slide, really the change management happens at those bottom two layers, the business analysts and the regional super users. I'm just getting I got some information from Emma in her seminar saying everyone's a change manager. That's right. And the first change managers are the business analysts and the super users. It's not the change agents that's going to come in and they're the change managers, because the change agents are just the facilitators to help the business analysts and the super users to actually communicate what the change will be, preparing the documentation, preparing the knowledge transfer that's required. And I just want to go back to Dan Krug's seminar on change management about those behavior habit patterns that you find in those different localities. And that's where the regional super users are so important, because they know what are the habitual patterns that are happening on the ground from their users, and they need to be identified and they need to be communicated. And then so there needs to be an action plan in order to resolve those based on what the system process design and what the functional blueprint will be. Also, I just want to add, we cannot work in silos. So we have the planning swim lane, the procurement swim lane, the warehousing swim lane, the logistics swim lane. But at the second level, information process model and digital roadmap, once those are developed, we need to make sure that they're connected. What are the touch points that exist between those levels? Because supply chain, it is a multifunctional department, right? So we need to build out those touch points, and that's really important, and not go out and deploy a solution in a certain silo. Next part, once we have that centralized operating model with the centralized corporate policy, we need a centralized management information system department. You cannot have scattered IT departments in every region, in every continent. It doesn't work. You don't achieve economies of scale. You cannot manage your priorities. So this is just a basic, hierarchy, organizational chart of what is required for digital transformation, where you have the CIO, you have the system architect, and you have a number of BAs. You need to have an army of BAs in your organization, because they are the ones who are going to be the boots on the ground, and they're going to deploy those projects. And you need to have specific BAs for each of those departments. And those BAs, they need to be able to configure the system. You cannot rely on system integrator consultants to come in and pay them a lot of money to set up the system for you. That expertise and that skill needs to be built in-house. And finally, the last centralized framework, is to have a global digital transformation steering committee. So at the table, you have your CEO and CIO. You also have the one representing the business analysts and the manager of all the system architects. So they're at the end of the table here. But what's more important are the seats that represent each department. So you have the department head or department executive for, let's say, finance and accounts, but he needs to be sitting across the global super user of finance and accounts. I was mentioning to you about the regional super users in the centralized operating model. So the regional super users report to the global super user. So they represent all the super users for that specific department. And they have an equal seat in the steering committee, because they're the one who has to escalate all the resistance issues that they're facing in the organization, all the problems, the gaps that they find between technology and the people. And they're the ones actually reporting to the executives what they're facing. And then that's when the executives need to remove those roadblocks moving forward. So having a global digital transformation steering committee is extremely, extremely important. And that everything has to be, it has to work in a centralized sort of framework. So we've got the centralized global operating model, a centralized management information system department, and a centralized global digital transformation steering committee. So those are the foundational frameworks there. And just going back to what Aaron, and connecting the dots with what Aaron was saying earlier. So key communication strategies, clear and consistent. Well, you need to have it clear and consistent through a centralized global operating model. You need to have, and that starts with that central corporate policy. You need to have, and it has to be localized. So that's where the regional super users fall into play. So you also you also pay in consideration those regional requirements, those local government requirements. Frequent feedback loops. So that's happening between the business analysts and the super users, and also in the steering committee meeting at a higher level with the global super users and the executive team. When we talk about cultural sensitivity, understanding differences, building cross-cultural awareness, and bridging the gap, well, the super users are extremely important. They're the ones who are going to communicate those differences. We cannot go totally vanilla. There are things that happen in this country that are very important for the people, for the user team. And change management across borders, having a unified framework, local champions mitigating resistance. So having that unified framework from that centralized global operating model, local champions with your super users, and mitigating resistance, so important to have that centralized steering committee, and that needs to, that needs to drive the digital transformation journey. If you don't have a strong steering committee, things won't get done. Roadblocks, challenges will not get resolved. So that's the end of our talk about tips for multinational digital transformation. Hope you enjoyed the presentation.